If I look at growth rates around the world, they've all obviously slowed down. And if we look at 2018, 2019, pre-COVID, and today, most economic indicators that I follow are lower than in 2019. And the typical family in the world, there are exceptions, but average family is less well off than they were in 2018, 2019, because the cost of living have gone up more than their salaries. And then we also have to distinguish, do people have cash or do they owe money? For people who have cash, like in my business, you need a lot of cash in the brokerage industry. The conditions are better now because interest rates have gone up. 3 years ago, you got next to zero interest. So that time was very bad for cash holders, deposit holders, whereas now it's relatively good. Other people, they have large borrowings, consumer credits and so forth. They're hurt by the rise in interest rates. Whenever someone asks or talks about the economy, we have to understand the economy is very complex and it consists of millions of households. And you can have some households, they are better off because of money printing. And these are the people that come on CNBC and on Fox News and the main media. And then they will tell you how great the economy is doing. And all these media outlets, they will not interview ordinary people on the street who are struggling. So the media is distorting the views, and the media is very, say in America, is very pro-government, Biden administration. So they will do everything to see to it that, say, the Biden administration stays in power. They're all afraid of Trump, and so forth and so on. So when we talk about the economy, to talk overall is not very helpful. We need to really look at specific sectors. It's like when someone asks me, are you bullish about stocks or bearish? Well, some stocks will go up and others will go down. And maybe everything goes down, but some will go down less than others. So everything is much more complex than the media makes it up to be. Because the media, they know the typical citizen has, young people nowadays have very short attention time. They like TikTok. That's TikTok. Rapid. This is my view about the global economy. I think the global economy, if we measure standards of living, the standards of living in most countries, there are some exceptions. Maybe in India, the standards of living of people have gone up in the last 5 years, most likely. But in Western countries, Western democracies, France, England, Germany, for sure, that is guaranteed. For sure, in these countries, the standards of living of the median family, the typical family, has gone down. The interest payments will outstrip the taxes collected. It's probably still less, but it will be a very considerable amount, over $1 trillion for sure. I think most Americans do not think enough about this issue. So you have a government debt that is growing very rapidly. The government debt grows very rapidly when the government spends more money than it collects in taxation. You can't do that permanently without causing some damage to the value of your currency. That is the first conclusion. In order to be reluctant to think that the dollar will remain strong, it's likely that the dollar will weaken. Number two, there is a problem if the government spends more than it collects. The problem can be solved in 3 different ways. The government could go to the people and say, look, we spend too much, we collect too little, we have to increase taxation. Show me a politician in the world that will be elected if he goes to the people and say, we need to increase taxation. None. Second solution is the government goes to the people and say, well, we spend too much, we have to implement cuts. And we start with police officers, firemen, and war veterans. We cut their benefits by 30%. I'd like to see the revolution that follows. The third way is, of course, default. But you understand, the issue is such that the financial system owns bonds that are issued by the government. So you have insurance companies, they own these bonds. You have pension funds, you have individuals, and you have mutual funds. If the government decides to default, I tell you, it's incredibly messy. Also international, because a lot of foreign countries, they own a large portion of the US debt. Every government throughout history in this situation of deficits has embarked on one policy measure, and that is to print money. Every government. throughout history, it is a tax, but people don't realize it, that it's a tax. The government can say, well, we have inflation. It's because of Putin. It's because of China, Xi Jinping. It's because of evil Iranians. And they have a whole catalog of excuses for inflation, with the exception of one issue. And this is that the government is overspending, and that the government, through its agent, the central bank, is printing money. That causes inflation. Neither Putin nor anybody else overseas. It's self-inflicted inflation, but they can't go to the people and say, well, we are a failed government, so we have inflation. Nowadays, if you look at the two parties, Republican and Democrats, both of them have no intention whatsoever to reduce the deficit. Zero intention. This is a dangerous situation in history where we have, not only in the US, in most democracies of the West, completely incompetent people. They never worked a day in their lives. They became professional politicians early on, or they went to university where they were taught by the communists and the socialists all kind of abstruse economic policies, measure and social theories, but they never worked in their lives. And they then, in their complete incompetence, take policy decisions. That is the worst part, because the market actually functions reasonably well. No market is perfect. In a free market, if you have a free system of thought, of economics, some people will go bankrupt. But you interfere into the free market with government officials that are dumb and incompetent, you distort the free economy, you create slower growth or recessions and the declining standards of living. That is a consequence of the current administration. There are certain things that are not predictable. Exactly what will happen, I don't know. We have to see who gets elected in November. But in general, I think if Kamala Harris and the Democrats win, it would be a disaster for the US and for the world. This is my view. That's why I wouldn't vote for her. But other people seemingly have different views. The danger is the corporate sector and wealthy people, they support actually these socialists and the crazy people because they think they can control them against the masses of people who don't want to vote for them. But I just want to say one thing. I mean, not all is lost. We can have elections. The last ones were probably stolen, but we can have elections. And in some countries, they have moved more to the right. And maybe in the US, Trump will be elected. And Trump is less unpleasant than Kamala Harris. I have friends, they think World War III has begun and it may escalate. We don't know. I mean, there could be an accident if Ukraine attacks Russian territory, and if they destroyed something major in Russia, I think Russia would respond. And I'd be a little bit careful to mess around with a country that has the missile and nuclear arsenal such as Russia. I think that we are not just about stocks, but I think we are at a major turning point in asset markets. And to explain it all, I have to go back to long-term cycles. We have cycles of accelerating inflation and then cycles of deflation or disinflation. And we have cycles of rising interest rates and falling interest rates, rising commodity prices and falling commodity prices. These cycles last 45 to 60 years. These are long cycles. And again, because of money printing, a lot has been distorted. But in general, the last cycle peak for commodities and inflation was 1980-81. Since then, inflation has been coming down and interest rates came down and bottomed out. Interest rates that had peaked in September 81, they bottomed out, say around August 2020 at an artificially low level. This level of interest rates were achieved by money printing by central banks. Now, this is my view, we are in a rising cycle of inflation and a rising cycle of interest rates, which may last for 20, 30 years. So we take the low 1920, we may go up until 1940, but these are long cycles. Now, inflation accelerates. There are periods like in the 70s when inflation comes down for 2 years in a row, the rate of inflation drops from, say, 8% to 4%, and interest rates on the 30-year treasuries drop from, say, 9% to 4%. Can happen. Has happened in the 70s, and yet interest rates went to 18% in 1981. Tell me, how can you go to Istanbul, you observe the city, you go to Argentina, you observe the streets, everything looks hunky-dory, and inflation is 60, 80, 100%. Level of interest rates does not tell you if money is tight or not. But some pension funds, they must buy bonds. And as long as you pay, some people will buy bonds, and the interest rates one day will go to positive. But it takes time. The government can go to corporation and say, they can go to Social Security and say, you must buy government bonds by law.